These are the Petronas Towers here in downtown Kuala Lumpur. They were once, by the way, the tallest buildings in the world. The two towers kind of represent the two sides of Malaysia's economic progress. On the one side, there has been great progress toward becoming a Tier 1 developed country. Personal income is up, unemployment is low, there's a stable political system, there's a thriving manufacturing industry, and a healthy agricultural sector. But some critics say this economic progress has come at a high cost, lack of respect for the environment.
Malaysia is a microcosm of the global competition between the environment and economic progress. We all want to drive cars, fly in airplanes, and throw out the trash. But that's not good for the environment. We would love to reduce carbon emissions, reduce the use of fossil fuels, and keep the earth green. But that does crimp our modern energy-dependent lifestyle. The focus of the environmental movement here in Southeast Asia is on deforestation, reducing the amount of natural forest. But economist Dr. Ye Kim Lang says Malaysia's record now is quite good.
In the case of Malaysia, I think we have more or less, given the low population density, as well as the fact that we have already achieved an upper middle income status, I think the pressure on converting the rest of the forest land into other uses will be less, you see. I think when we look at this perspective, I think Malaysia, in a way, would have overcome that possibility of a resource trap, where we need to reduce our forested land to what we see in the developed countries, where forests actually account for less than 20% of the total land area. See. So we are in a comfortable proposition to actually achieve a fairly sizable proportion of land that will be under natural forest cover.
Dr. Ye says the environmentalists should really be focusing their attention on other countries like Indonesia and Brazil, where continuing deforestation really is an issue.
So I think in terms of the tropical deforestation, I think we have to monitor other countries more, perhaps more stringently, given the fact that the large part of the deforestation are happening in Indonesia as well, and Brazil. You see.
Even the once dreaded palm oil mills in Malaysia are now working to protect the environment. One of the byproducts of producing biomass from palm oil fruit bunches is methane, a potent greenhouse gas that used to be released into the atmosphere. Now it is being captured and processed to produce electricity.
Traditionally, this process is being done with a series of open ponds. And during the anaerobic stage of this open ponding system, methanes are being generated. And what we are doing here is that we are also replacing this open pond, the anaerobic parts, with a series of tanks. We call them anaerobic digester tanks. So these anaerobic digester tanks basically do the same thing, the anaerobic degradation process. With a difference, the methane is being captured. So the captured methane is going to be channeled into gas engines, which is being burned to generate electricity.
As for the palm oil plantations themselves, the people in charge say they don't add carbon to the atmosphere, they actually remove it.
We have submitted our data to the UNFCCC. This is the international body that collects all the emission data from each country. And in our submission, the data shows that the palm industry is a net remover of CO2 or greenhouse gas from the atmosphere.
But there are still problems. Just looking at this hazy sky in Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur, the air is not healthy. But once again, the finger points not to Malaysia, but to nearby Indonesia. Niels Matson is an engineer working on environmental issues here, and he says he knows why the air is so dirty.
It's because right across the Malacca Straits, on the island of Sumatra, they are burning the rainforest. They're not only burning the rainforest, they are also burning agricultural residues. The combined effect of that gives this haze, and it's been ongoing for a very long time.
There are now laws in both countries prohibiting open burning. And Tan Sri says where there is illegal burning, it is not related to palm oil.
A lot of fallacies are being propagated. All palm plantations do not burn anything because there is no advantage in burning for either clearing the land or while developing the oil palm, because the oil palm needs all the biomass as compost, as fertilizer. Eventually, when the tree debris rot, this is good for the oil palm. So burning is a no-no for the oil palm industry, and people still keep associating oil palm industry with open burning, which is not true. In fact, we had a huge El Nino dry period occurring in '98, and I see the NGOs putting up forest fires of this '98 El Nino every time they want to do a negative campaign on palm oil, accusing us of burning forests. But forests got burned during El Nino. There are forest fires in LA and in Sydney and everywhere else in Greece occurring every year. We happen to have one hot El Nino period in '98, and a lot of forest fires happened. And these pictures of these forest fires are being replayed until today.
Bottom line, it comes back to the balance issue, protecting the environment while at the same time protecting the economic needs of the population.
And we brought in our good agriculture practices of planting oil palm according to the appropriate way that the oil palm should be cultivated. With the various good codes of practices being employed, I think we are helping to establish the right approach to managing and planting this crop, ensuring a balance between care for the environment and ensuring that people get employed, and as well as the operations bring back revenue and profit and benefits to the investors.
One particularly sensitive environmental issue for palm oil is the use of peatlands and wetlands for use as oil palm plantations. The use of these degraded pieces of land creates special and serious problems for the environment. Dr. H.J. Kisrul is the chairman of Wetlands International, an NGO that works to protect wetlands and peatlands. So what exactly are wetlands?
Well, as the name suggests, wetlands is that area where there is the interface between land and water. So we'll be looking at the coastal zone, we're looking at swamps, we're looking at riverbanks, we're looking at lakes and offshore areas. And it's this place where the depth of water would not be more than 6 meters.
And I asked Dr. Kisrul to define peatlands.
So when we look at peat, peat is where in the past there were forests, and over the years the forest died out, and a lot of the carbon in the trees are now buried, and they have evolved into peatland. If they were deeper, they would probably end up as oil or something. But unfortunately, in peat areas, we have not reached that stage.
As with most topics related to palm oil and the environment, the issue of peatlands is a complicated one, and again an issue of finding the right balance between the environment and the economic needs of people.
There may be occasion where local communities have settled into townships, in the old days where the township may be surrounded by peat area. These people need land to develop agriculture to survive, and obviously for them the best thing is to develop the land around where they have settled, in the river mouth areas where townships and settlements took place. And in this way, peat needs to be developed to support local communities, and these are the same indigenous people who want to have a piece of the action in terms of participating in oil palm cultivation. If they live in that area, they cannot travel 200-300 miles away for looking at agricultural land, when all the land around where they live is probably peatland.
We need to understand the background to why people are moving into these areas, because peat and mangrove, they are in a sense marginal lands, and in the past people would not move into them because it's not easy to grow agriculture in these places when you have better arable lands. Unfortunately, over the years, as we have population growth, we now get more and more pressure on food security, on water security, and therefore people are now moving into this area.
Using peatlands is a problem because, by definition, peatland is loaded with carbon, and the digging up of peatlands releases vast amounts of carbon into the atmosphere.
There have been estimates about how much carbon is stored on peatlands. So worldwide, peatlands form only about 3% of the land area. But it is estimated that they store within it something like 75% of the carbon in our atmosphere. And this means that they are really very large stores for carbon.
The other problem with using peatlands is the temptation to clear the land by burning what's left there. And that is definitely not good for the environment. In fact, the destruction of peatlands creates more greenhouse gases than automobile emissions.
Well, it's estimated that tearing down the forest, especially peat swamp forests, accounts somewhere between 10 to 20% of total greenhouse gases. That's much more than all cars. We speak about cars is because we see them. We don't see the rainforest being disturbed.
When you want to move into peat, because of the high groundwater table, we have to drain it. And when we drain peatlands, we get subsidence and we get release of methane, and these are all greenhouse gases.
So while the percentage of agricultural land that is peatlands is small, the consequences of abusing those lands are large, and the need to use that land in a sustainable manner is critical.
In a sustainable manner, it would mean that we can continue to use the land for production, for food production, or for agriculture production, and it does not degrade the land in the process. And mankind, we've been doing this in the normal lands for ages. It's just that when we move into peat areas, then we have to be extra careful, we have to take precautions. We have got to make sure that the systems we put in place do not overdrain the area. Because once we overdrain it, it becomes irreversible, the land subsides, and over time, we can end up with the land being abandoned.
The problem, once again, is finding that balance between the need to feed the world's growing population and the need to protect our environment. That leads to some tough choices when there are 1 billion people in the world suffering from malnutrition. That's where Malaysia's palm oil comes in, supplying almost 1/3 of the world's need for edible oils and fats.
Palm oil is supplying about 30% of the world requirement for oils and fats, which is mostly used for food. Without palm oil, there would be a lot of problems in trying to have adequate amount of food, oils and fats, because the world is growing in its population, reaching already 7 billion now, and a lot of countries are actually net importers. They don't have enough of their own oils and fats, and they have to import. And palm oil is the only commodity that is produced in excess amount by Malaysia and neighboring countries like Indonesia, to the extent that we probably account for 60% of the world export availability of oils and fats.
Indeed, palm oil is an ingredient in so many foods consumed around the world. U.R. Unatan is executive director of Caratino, a company which supplies palm oil products to the global market.
Palm oil goes into almost all kinds of foods. And if I start in Asia, if you look at foods like noodles, we call it, or pasta as it is called in the EU, uses palm. Palm is used both in the dough before it is fried, and is also used as a frying medium. Palm goes into all kinds of cookies as shortenings. Palm goes into all kinds of cakes as margarine. Palm goes into almost many types of cereal products where fat is consumed. So if you look at it today, I think the world market, and of course snack foods is one of the most popular uses of palm because of its oxidative stability. So potato crisps or any kind of snack food. So if you look at the use in the food industry, I'd say palm has now penetrated almost all segments of the food industry.
So we have seen concern for the environment, for the fate of the orangutans, and for the demands of global food security. But what about people? How are they affected by this struggle between economic growth and the environment? The best way to find the answer to that question is to talk with the people on the ground, the people in Malaysia who earn their living by growing oil palm trees on land given to them by Felda.
Felda gave me 10 acres of land. 8 acres was for rubber and 2 acres for oil palm. This was back in 1964. Felda enabled me to be a farmer. In 1964, I started with rubber trees and oil palm trees. I tapped the rubber by myself and harvested the palm oil fruit by myself. I was also a mother and had to raise 2 children. I started in 1979 during the last stage of the Felda program. Before I became a farmer, I was a day laborer doing various jobs. I got paid on a daily basis, very low wages. Living was difficult. We had no running water. We had to collect rainwater. We had no electricity.
Of course, as we saw earlier, Felda is quite a different organization today than it was when these palm oil farmers first started out some 50 years ago. But despite the financial temptations of the IPO, Felda's CEO says these settlers' interests have been protected despite some vocal complaints.
There have been, I think, more the negative reporting. My hypothesis is that it's more based on political intention. It's not related to business. As I said just now, not an inch of the settlers' land have been taken for the IPO is land outside the settlement scheme. So the settlers are not being shortchanged or having deprived of their income. They will continue to get their income from their 10 acres of land.
As Felda's CEO suggests, in this election season in Malaysia, many issues are tainted by politics, especially the claims that these small landholders have been taken advantage of.
Outside third parties, NGOs try to come and use their financial power to get the native to become more, let's say, aggressive in trying to claim their rights and so on. But this is all either politically motivated or NGO motivated.
These small landholders we just heard from all started out as laborers working in the fields, and they are now managers and entrepreneurs.
Before I was on my own, but now I have 2 workers to help me on the plantation. I used to be a laborer putting down the manure on the rubber plants for fertilizer. Now I have 2 to 3 workers who help me.
Despite the general praise for Felda, there have been some complaints about how the money from the IPO has been distributed. But the Felda CEO says the workers have been treated well.
There is a 20% of the total IPO of the FGV shares allocated as a trust fund for the settlers. And the settlers don't have to pay for this. That 20% today is worth about 3.7 billion ringgit. And this is a trust fund set specially for the settlers. And once we give dividend, the settlers will get continuously the dividend from the 20% trust fund. Apart from that, they also got the one-off windfall profit, 15,000 ringgit, given to the head of family, to the wife, and also to the children. This is something not done in other parts of the world. We are not using the taxpayers' money to give this windfall profit. It is money raised from the IPO.
Perhaps most important of all, the children of these palm oil farmers are certainly better off than their parents.
I feel very lucky getting involved in Felda at the later stages when water and roads had already been put in. I have 4 children and our lives have improved a lot, significantly. It's a big difference and it has enabled me to get an education for my kids. In fact, Felda gave us an extra amount for the kids' education. They now have good jobs and one was even able to go abroad to study in Russia. All of my children are out of farming and they are all independent and are doing other jobs outside the plantation business. My daughter works in Kuala Lumpur now, and maybe one day when she gets older, she might get back into the plantation business. When my kids were young, I trained them on the plantation work, but they chose different jobs. 1 went into the medical field and 2 went into business, and they make more money that way.
Palm oil is certainly important to the Malaysian economy, but it is not the only driver of Malaysia's economic success. In fact, by many measures, the overall Malaysian economy has performed better over the last 5 years than the U.S. and most countries in Europe.
We have pulled out of the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, where we basically experienced a relatively shallow recession of negative 1.7% GDP contraction, which is much shallower compared to our crisis during the Asian financial crisis in 1997-98, where the economy actually contracted by close to 6.5%. Part of the reason for this shallow recession is that the fact that Malaysian economic fundamentals going into the recession was much stronger.
As you look at the world now, you look at Europe, you look at America, their GDP numbers have been coming down a lot. But you are looking at Malaysia, on a full year, we are still looking at a GDP of 4.6% for this year. And next year, we are looking at 5.3%. So you are seeing a lot of this economic transformation program that is actually promoting private consumption, that's creating a lot of private enterprise.
And while the U.S. and Europe are still battling high unemployment rates, the job market here in Malaysia is rather tight.
It is a very tight employment market. Finding good people is difficult because people do have choices. So I think compared to many other countries, unemployment rate in Malaysia is still very low.
One of the strengths of the Malaysian economy today is that it has diversified and evolved past dependence primarily on natural resources. Dr. Wong Lai Sum is CEO of MATRADE, the Malaysia External Trade Development Corporation.
We diversified. Some time ago, we actually started to diversify our trade, not just in terms of partners, but also in terms of goods. So if you're now taking this interview in the midst of a showroom, and this showroom you can see there are many diversified products and services, so to speak. So in Malaysia's case, the act of diversifying our products, going into more value-added manufacturers, for example, was one of the ways in which we went up the value chain and we created more opportunities for Malaysian companies using technology, both homegrown as well as imported technology, and developed together with investors.
We've been talking a lot about Felda, the Federal Land Development Authority, and the Felda IPO. But Felda is not the only investment success story here in Malaysia. Yaw Chun Soon says there are lots of undiscovered investment opportunities here.
I would say that Malaysia has been not very well covered, and so there has been some misconception or misunderstanding about the Malaysian market, and that we seems to be off the radar screen of many foreign investors. But you really look at Malaysia itself, you will see that out of that 1,000 companies, there are many value companies which has not been subject to research by the research companies. And so there is a huge fertile investment opportunity that is here, and you have many investors comes in. The fact that the 5 big foreign houses that comes in is a testimony that there are actually money to be made in Malaysia.
One of Malaysia's strengths appears to be its highly developed business infrastructure.
Well, Malaysia's actually got, in the financial sector, one of the more effective regulatory frameworks I've seen. You've got a highly effective central bank with quite strong regulatory frameworks. And at the time of the Asian financial crisis in 1998, Malaysia did better than many of the neighboring countries, partly as a result of its regulatory framework.
And what about all the outside pressure to force Malaysia to conform to certain external standards regarding its agricultural policies? The CEO of Malaysia's Palm Oil Council says not to worry.
Being an independent country, we agree to observe some degree of sovereign independence, sovereignty, which means that we dictate how we run our country, how much forest we keep, how much agriculture we want to do, and so on and so forth. No amount of pressure from the NGOs would subject us to, to be under threat for whatever good or not so good reasons.
It is true that sometimes countries in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, get a bad rap when it comes to their business investment climate. But the business leaders I spoke to here say, come see for yourself.
If any visitor were to come to Malaysia and just look around, they'll be amazed. They'll be amazed simply because they came with a different mindset. Some may even think that we are still living on treetops house. So when they come, they begin to see the infrastructure, the highway system, the road networks, the buildings, and how developed we are in so many industries. Their perception just changed immediately. And I think their only regret is that, why didn't I come to Malaysia earlier?
There's more ahead on Malaysia and the business of palm oil. Join us next week when we look at the extraordinary pharmaceutical and nutraceutical applications of palm oil, and we explore the unique business culture of Malaysia, a Muslim country with a Western appetite for profit and success. That's coming up next week on Palm Oil, Nature's Blessing or Nature's Curse. Reporting from Malaysia, I'm Stuart Chaffee.